We got some updates for you in the Sean Diddy Combs case. The music mogul and apparent leader of an alleged criminal enterprise was rushed to the hospital over the weekend. And this at the same time as a co-defendant in one of his civil rape cases is fighting back and coming directly for one of...
The courtroom wasn't quiet in a peaceful way. No, this silence was heavy, suffocating, almost like the air itself was holding its breath. Every inhale echoed like a drumbeat, every glance carried weight. It was the silence before an explosion, the kind that makes your skin crawl because you know something monumental is about to go down.
Okay, so we have an update now when it comes to Sean Diddy Combs. And the first one, unexpected. Apparently, it's being reported that he left the Metropolitan Detention Center in Brooklyn last week. This is where he's currently being housed as he waits trial in criminal charges. And he left to get an MRI at a nearby hospital. So the New York Post reports that the 55-year-old rapper was moved to Brooklyn Hospital Thursday night for the scan. And according to a source, the MRI was for apparent knee pain. Combs has reportedly dealt with knee problems since running the New York Marathon back in the early 2000s. Combs, by the way, used that race to raise millions of dollars for New York City children. And the source told the New York Post that Combs was moved at night to try to keep the exam as low-key as possible. But clearly it became public, and Combs reportedly didn't stay overnight, went back to the cell once the exam was over. Combs' attorney, Mark Agnifilo, told TMZ, "I cannot comment on anything related to prisoner movements. Also, I'm not commenting on anything related to possible medical issues." As he shouldn't, that is private information. The only way it really would come up during the course of the criminal case is if you say it somehow relates to his detention or somehow relates to his movements or any certain accommodation should be made, sentencing if he's ultimately convicted, but right now we won't know more information. In the meantime, let's talk about the fact that Combs' co-defendant in a civil case, a case, by the way, that accuses him and this co-defendant, another A-lister, of rape, this guy is once again slamming the attorney behind the case, insisting that he be sanctioned for allegedly not doing his job. We're talking, of course, about Sean Carter, better known as Jay-Z, once again calling out attorney Tony Buzbee, calling out his character, more specifically in question, claiming that the Texas attorney's filings have, quote, substantial inaccuracies and that there was a failure to properly investigate before filing. Now, we've talked about this before, but basically, a civil lawsuit was filed against Sean Combs on behalf of a Jane Doe who says that she was raped by Combs and another celebrity at a home after the Video Music Awards in 2000. She says she was just 13 years old when this happened. And weeks after the initial filing, Buzbee submitted an amended complaint naming Jay-Z as the celebrity who allegedly participated in this assault. Both rappers have adamantly denied the allegations, Jay-Z on the offensive, arguing that Jane Doe's story is full of holes, that all of this should have been obvious to any competent attorney who was going to take her case. And this isn't the first time that Jay-Z has gone after Tony Buzbee. In fact, earlier this month, the rapper filed a motion seeking dismissal and sanctions, accusing Buzbee of failing to properly vet the accuser's claims. And now Jay-Z is doubling down, saying, in fact, that Buzbee never even met Jane Doe before filing the lawsuit. That is a stunning allegation. So let's dig into the latest filing, because it reads, quote, "A principled attorney, when confronted with factual inconsistencies that cast grave doubt on horrific allegations and reveal the inadequacy of any pre-filing inquiry, would reconsider the lawsuit. Instead, plaintiff's lead attorney, Anthony Buzbee, tried to gloss over them. Initially, he deflected, saying plaintiff's case was referred to his firm by another who vetted it prior to sending it to him, and that his firm would continue to vet her claims and collect corroborating data. Now, he concedes that he did not even meet with plaintiff before signing his name to the complaint and fails to identify any evidence that corroborates anything his client alleged." So Jay-Z's legal team points out that despite having litigated this case for months in the Southern District of New York, Buzbee has not sought admission to that court, meaning he hasn't filed a motion to appear pro hoc vice and pay the associated fees. So you're not licensed to practice in New York, but you get a temporary...
And right there, at the defense table, sat Sean Diddy Combs. His posture screamed tension, shoulders stiff, eyes darting, trying desperately to cling to some kind of control. For weeks, he'd endured testimony after testimony, headline after headline, each one clawing at his empire. Yet, despite all the fire thrown his way, he truly believed he had survived the storm. But then it happened. The judge called the next witness, Sean Carter, Jay-Z. The name alone cracked the air like lightning. Gasps echoed across the room. Reporters clutched their pens like weapons. Jurors leaned in as though this was the plot twist they'd been waiting for. The gallery froze, their disbelief painted across every face. And Diddy? He went rigid. His head snapped toward the judge, his jaw falling open as if those words had sucked the life right out of him. His eyes screamed no. It was as if someone had just pulled the rug out from under his entire existence. Jay-Z wasn't just another witness. He wasn't a random industry face. He was the brother, the ally, the untouchable peer. And now, he was walking through that door. Calm, collected, each stride slicing through the silence like a blade. The betrayal was already in motion.
By Jay-Z and Sean Combs. And by the way, she also claims there was a female celebrity who was there, saw this, but has not been identified in this complaint. Now, Jane Doe claims that she ran from the home, found a gas station, called her father, he picked her up. The problem with all of that is there was bombshell reporting from NBC News, and it kind of put a spotlight on some serious apparent flaws in her recollection. In fact, NBC interviewed Jane Doe as well as her father, who says he has no memory whatsoever of making what would be an hours-long drive to pick up his teenage daughter. And according to Busby, some of his colleagues, they did the background work on the lawsuit. But the defense points out that Busby signed his name to this complaint, so any alleged inconsistencies, that's on him. And we'll talk more about what these inconsistencies or apparent inconsistencies are, but Jane Doe has acknowledged there might be problems in her account, but it doesn't take away from the fact that she says this happened to her. But the filing reads, quote, having purportedly left the requisite vetting to others, Mr. Busby cannot now properly serve as the lone declarant, attesting to matters that are outside his personal knowledge and known only to non-declarants who sit silent. He cannot continue post-complaint to whistle past demonstrated inaccuracies in plaintiff's allegations that are staring him in the face. An attorney who fails to investigate adequately before filing a complaint, particularly one alleging serious criminal conduct that will inevitably cause reputational harm, is subject to Rule 11 sanctions. And sanctions can include things like, having to pay a penalty to court or cover the other party's legal fees. Rule 11 sanctions are pretty high up there. I've talked about it before. You're talking about submitting something that is not based in fact or law, that you're only filing something to harass another party. Really, really bad conduct. But the lawsuit lays out what Jay-Z and his team claim are some of Busby's alleged bad acts in connection with Jane Doe's lawsuit. As to Mr. Busby's reliance on other lawyers and a retired police detective to interview plaintiff and fact-check her account, none of those individuals has even been named, let alone produced as a declarant. Nor does the opposition specify which aspects of plaintiff's complaint were fact-checked. Most strikingly, there is no claim that anyone asked the plaintiff's father, a key participant and ready interviewee, whether he remembered his chapter in the FAC's remarkable saga, to which the answer would have been no. And the lawsuit also has a chart that highlights 9 facts that Busby mentioned in the amended complaint, which the defense objects to. So the first allegation is that a friend drove Jane Doe from Rochester to New York City, and Jay-Z's team says that this was never fact-checked, and that when Busby, his legal team, was asked to identify who this person was, they said it was a 20-year-old who unfortunately is now dead. Second, that plaintiff watched the VMAs on a jumbotron.
Jay-Z's entrance wasn't loud or flashy. He didn't need it to be. His composure was its own storm. No theatrics, no nervous tics, just a calm, measured stride that told everyone in that room one thing. This wasn't his first battlefield, but everyone watching knew it. This was no ordinary witness. This was the betrayal that rewrote history. Every step Jay-Z took toward the stand sent shockwaves through the crowd. You could practically hear hearts pounding. Diddy's eyes locked onto him, disbelief melting into a slow, simmering fury. His lips moved in whispers sharp enough to cut, aimed at his lawyer, while his hand gripped the table so tightly his knuckles turned bone white. It was raw. It was painful. It was watching a man realize, live in front of the world, that the fortress he thought indestructible had just been demolished from the inside. Jay-Z raised his right hand, swore to tell the truth, sat down, calm, steady, like he'd rehearsed this exact moment in his head 100 times. And maybe, just maybe, he had. The prosecutor wasted no time. A thick folder, heavy with secrets, slammed onto the table. Papers, photographs, transcripts. Jay-Z's fingers flipped through them like pages of a diary only he had the key to. The stage was set, and then it began.
Man who says that he was assaulted at the Intercontinental Hotel in 2020 after working for Sean Combs for years. According to the complaint, plaintiff met defendant Sean Combs in about 2006 when Sean Combs hired him to run errands for him in his capacity as CEO of Bad Boy Records. In or about February 2020, plaintiff set up a meeting with defendant Sean Combs through Combs' assistant to discuss missing job payments. And that meeting was at the Intercontinental New York, which, by the way, has been mentioned before in another Sean Combs lawsuit, because according to the Santa Ventura, that was actually the site of a freak-off in 2013 that ended with Combs being charged tens of thousands of dollars in damages by the hotel. So going back to this lawsuit, during this meeting with Sean Combs, John Doe alleges that he was alone with the Bad Boy CEO, and this was after security had left the room. Combs, according to him, reportedly made the two drinks. John Doe started to get really tired, claims Combs suggested lie down, take a nap, and he says when he woke up, Sean Combs was assaulting him. Again, very consistent pattern in these allegations between all three men. According to the complaint, after this rape, defendant Sean Combs told plaintiff that going to the police will make plaintiff, quote, look like an idiot, and that because Combs is Diddy, plaintiff would never be able to substantiate his claims against Combs. He also claims that men from defendant Sean Combs' entourage also called plaintiff on his cell phone to threaten and intimidate plaintiff into silence after the sexual assault. So again, these lawsuits have been filed against not only Combs, but also his companies, which the John Does argued they were responsible for knowing what the rapper was up to and failing to do anything to stop it, that they helped provide the means for Combs to keep up this alleged misconduct. All right, so I am joined right now by the attorney who is representing these three men suing Sean Combs. Thomas Gifford joins us right now. Thank you so much for coming here on Sidebar. Really appreciate it.
Thank you for having me.
So the first question I had when I saw this, and it's a question I have a lot when you're seeing a number of these Sean Combs lawsuits coming out, is why file now? Why come forward now with these claims?
Well, it's in a lot of cases, when you have serial sex abuse like this or any kind of a sexual assault, it's very difficult for the victims to come forward. There's a lot of shame, there's a lot of embarrassment, and in Sean Combs' case is a lot different in that all three of my victims after the assault were all threatened. So there was a very real threat and fear that something bad could happen to them if they came forward. And I think once everything became public, there's strength in numbers. And when they saw that they would be safe, they felt comfortable coming forward and seeking to hold him accountable for what he did to them.
Did they ever, either now or at some point in the past, did they ever report this to police?
No, did not.
Jay-Z's eyes scanned the evidence, and then, in that deep, deliberate voice that once commanded arenas, he spoke. And his first words? They landed like thunder. He confirmed meetings, confirmed conversations, pulled back the curtain on arrangements that tied directly into Diddy's empire. The very shadows everyone had whispered about but never dared put into the light. This wasn't gossip. This wasn't speculation. It was cold, detailed, insider knowledge. The kind of truth only someone at the core could spill. The jury's eyes widened. Reporters scribbled like their pens were on fire. The gallery buzzed into a frenzy of whispers so loud the judge had to slam his gavel to restore order. And Diddy? He was falling apart. His chest heaved, his lips pressed thin, his head shaking violently like he could somehow erase Jay-Z's words. Then, boom! His hand smacked down on the table, the sound cracking through the air. "That's not true!" he shouted. The outburst rattled even his own lawyers. The judge pounded for silence, but it was too late. The image of Diddy, unraveling, losing control, was forever burned into that courtroom. Jay-Z didn't flinch, not once. He just kept going.
The court is going to rule on key pieces of evidence. The prosecution says defense counsel's proposal that the enterprise letter be filed prior to pretrial motions is contrary to the practice in this district and inefficient, given that pretrial motions could impact the substance of the letter. So again, they're saying them laying out their entire case and what they have, it's too premature. The court has to work out other issues before we can submit the letter. And the government argues that Combs isn't playing fair. Quote, the defendant was arrested in September 2024, and the trial date was set at the defendant's insistence for May 5th, 2025, a span of fewer than 8 months. The defendant is trying to have his cake and eat it too here by insisting on a speedy trial, but also insisting on deadlines in cases with much longer timelines. And by the way, speaking of the defense, Here is their position on the Enterprise letter. They write, quote, Mr. Combs is at a significant disadvantage. Defense counsel still do not understand the contours of the government's allegations, including who the government even considers a victim, and have repeatedly asked for assistance from the government. Unless and until the government is required to make trial disclosures, the defense will remain ignorant of the evidence it is required to meet. The result will be a fundamentally flawed trial. Accordingly, Mr. Combs proposes that the government file its Enterprise letter by February 1st, 2025. So that is less than a month away. That's just a few weeks away. So that is one disclosure issue in this letter. Also in the letter, we move on to notices regarding who will be called as expert witnesses and rebuttal expert witnesses. So here, the prosecution is proposing that all parties, the prosecution and the defense, provide notice of their experts about 8 weeks before trial, March 7th, 2025. And rebuttal experts, if there are any, 2 weeks later, by March 21st. So that is 6 weeks before trial. And the reason that you need to provide notice to the other side of who you're planning to call is because opposing sides need time to vet the reliability and the relevance of expert witnesses. In the law, we call that the Daubert standing, or briefing on Daubert. Now, the prosecution says here's the problem. Combs' lawyers have indicated they are not going to provide their notice of who their experts are until the prosecution first provides their experts. And the prosecution says that's inefficient. It won't provide them enough time to file challenges, and that is inconsistent with how things are done here. And speaking of the defense, they say, yeah, prosecution, you know what? You should present notice of your experts by March 7th, 2025. Then we'll provide notice of our experts for the first time on March 21st, 2025. And then, government, you can provide your rebuttal experts on March 28th. And despite the prosecution's argument, the defense is saying this is consistent with how things are done and what the federal rules of criminal procedure say. And there's a special rule about that. Perhaps both sides will debate on if the defense has to disclose their experts, only if the defense first requests the same from the government. Gets a little complicated, but it's going to be a back and forth about when exactly the defense has to submit their experts to the prosecution, because, again, both sides need time to prepare challenges to those experts. From there, we have something called 404B 413 notice. So this is about evidence of other crimes or acts or wrongs that were committed by Sean Combs that may be used to show things like motive or lack of accident, or that there was a plan. And also, this concerns evidence of other sexual assaults. So basically what we're talking about is what the government plans to
The judge's gavel hammered the bench, demanding silence. But honestly, it was useless. The damage was already seared into everyone's minds. Diddy, exploding in anger, while Jay-Z sat there calm as a stone. It was like a movie scene, but painfully real. Jay-Z, the unshakable figure, laid out the empire piece by piece, peeling back the carefully crafted layers Diddy had built over decades. He spoke of hidden transactions. He described private conversations once dismissed as rumors. He unveiled connections long denied. Every revelation was another crack splintering through Diddy's ironclad image. The gallery gasped. Some people literally had their jaws hanging open. Others covered their mouths as if they couldn't bear to hear it. Because this wasn't just evidence. It was betrayal, carved into the very bones of the music industry. For years, Diddy and Jay-Z had stood shoulder to shoulder, powerhouses, moguls, symbols of what it meant to rise from nothing and dominate. Together, they had battled scandals, silenced rivalries, and defied the relentless eye of fame. And now, that brotherhood was shattering, right there, in front of the cameras. Diddy slumped back in his chair, shaking his head, mumbling to himself like a man abandoned by the very world he once commanded. He wasn't just losing control, he was watching his legacy collapse in real time. Jay-Z's words filled the courtroom like daggers. The tension was so thick you could almost taste it. Diddy's eyes darted wildly, from jurors to the judge to the cameras, as if he could somehow will someone to make this stop. But no one stepped in. No one could. This was happening. His lawyers tried to calm him, placing hands on his arm, whispering soothing words, but he shook them off, his face twisted with rage. His disbelief had hardened into anger, his pride shredded to desperation. And then came the moment, the question that froze every soul in that courtroom. The prosecutor leaned in and asked Jay-Z, "Do you believe Mr. Combs orchestrated the darker dealings tied to this case?" The silence was suffocating, the room was paralyzed, even breathing seemed forbidden. Jay-Z looked straight ahead, unblinking, his face gave nothing away, and then in one single word he detonated the bomb. "Yes." The explosion was immediate. Gasps, shouts, hands flying to cover mouths. The gallery turned into chaos, the judge slamming his gavel over and over, his voice straining for order. Diddy snapped. He leapt up from his chair, pointing furiously at Jay-Z, shouting at the top of his lungs while his lawyer struggled to drag him back down. Security guards edged closer, ready to pounce if things spiraled any further. But Diddy wasn't just angry. He was broken. The disbelief, the humiliation, it was too much. This wasn't just testimony. This was the ripping apart of a bond, the public death of loyalty, power, and silence. Every word Jay-Z spoke hammered another nail into Diddy's defense. Every revelation painted a picture darker than the one before, and for Diddy, it was a nightmare playing out live.